get right into this, everybody. ICS is doing threat intelligence wrong. Okay, that's my hot take. Let me tell you what I mean. So right now in the current state, something happens. So maybe there's a vendor, cybersecurity vendor company who has some researchers who come up with something new. Maybe, gosh forbid, there's something that actually happens, an attack against ICS systems. What happens is either your vendor or maybe your internal team will ingest this information, will regurgitate it, write it up a little bit more, put their own threat group names on it, put an opinion dressed up as an assessment, slap it on there, good to go, out the door. But the problem with this approach, it's not inherently bad, but it's really passive. It's really reactive. So either you are the news, you are the problem, or you're just reading the news. There's nothing that you're doing that's moving everything a step forward. So what we want to do is we want to take a more proactive approach to threat intelligence, using a couple more traditional intelligence routes, as it were. So what I want to talk about today is targeteering. And just really quick before I go any further, a little disclaimer, I am speaking today just as an individual. I am not associated with employers past, present, or future. I am just speaking as me. Any examples that I give are examples from research that I've done that's been publicly published. And so there is nothing, there's just me today, guys. Nothing else. So, and this is a process that I just came up with as an individual while learning about and working through ICS-specific problem sets. So targeteering as a concept is not new. It's a military concept. It's really somebody who is responsible for planning and coordinating these bombardment-style attacks. But don't let this kind of military background be a barrier to entry. I have no military background, and I do this. This is an Air Force-specific term, but really you can take this approach to your work with any background that you have. So targeteering is all about identifying key dependencies. So you can do this both on the battlefield, obviously, if you're in the military, or you can do it within critical infrastructure. So let's define what a key dependency is, because that's really what the talk is built on. A dependency, by definition, is a noun, right? So it's a person, a place, or a thing. A key dependency is an identification of a single point of failure. So it's a person, a place, or a thing that if it goes down, everything goes down, we're in trouble. So this could be, it could be a person, it could be a controller, a control engineer in a control room. It could be a place where a bunch of pipelines all converge into one bigger pipeline, or it could be an actual piece of technology. So that's like an actual HMI or a PLC, something like that. So when you're working with key dependencies, what you can do is you can use them to create hypotheses, right? So you're saying, my hypothesis is that if I target X thing, Y fails, Y shuts down. And so there's 5 simple steps that I've come up with when I'm actually moving through this process to define where you start and where you stop. So before I jump into this slide, as another note, when you're working through this process, I highly recommend using something that will let you keep track of your data. So you want something that will help you, if you need to look back later in the future and be like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about where I got this piece of information from. So OneNote, Maltego, whatever works for your brain, even if it's just keeping up a Word document that you keep saving, so you can look back later, and that helps you when you want to do, if this leads to a write-up in the end, it helps you draw back to that as well. So the first thing you want to do is you want to select your broad target. So this is your who you're going to be targeting. The second thing you want to do, and this is a little bit of a stretch, but bear with me, you want to learn the fundamentals of your target, or why your target is a good target. The third thing you want to do is identify where your key dependencies are, or what your key dependencies are. That's your what. The fourth thing is understanding where they live within a broader environment. That's your where. And the fifth thing is looking for vulnerabilities, and that, of course, would be your how you're going to target. So the 6th secret step is profit is needed, and we'll get into this later. But just to plant a seed in your head now, your profit is what you're going to do with this information. So you're targeteering for a reason. I mean, unless you're just me and you're doing it for fun, this is what you're going to do with that information at the end. And it does change based on who you are, what organization you're with, etc. So the first thing you want to do is select your broad target. Once again, this is your who you're going to be targeting. The first thing you want to do when you're thinking about this is consider your objectives. So if I'm just an independent cyber researcher, right, the world is my oyster. I could look at any system, it doesn't really matter. If I was working for an original equipment manufacturer, maybe I would be wanting to look at something in my supply chain, for example. I would want to be looking at what if this product didn't come in from this place and it could cause everything to crash, what is that product and how do I identify where it is? And if you're like an asset owner or operator, obviously you'd want to be applying this process to your own systems and targeting against your own systems to figure out where the weak spots are. Just with traditional intelligence, you want to consider what you're doing in the context of current events. So if we think about obviously what's going on in Ukraine, maybe there are European asset owners and operators who are kind of perking up a little bit. You can use current events to help frame what you're going to target here. And the last thing is known weaknesses. So for example, if we think about Oldsmar, right? When that happened, we all kind of took a mental step back and said, okay, we know that water treatment plants is a potential weakness. We know this. We've seen it targeted before. This is how we can defend against it in the future. So with each of these, I'm going to talk about a little bit more about what it is. I'm going to give, for when relevant, some open source references that you can use or your team can use back at home to do this research. And then I'm going to tell a story. And I always joke about this because I love trains, and so I always have to find a way to fit them into every talk I give. One of my first research projects that I did was on trains, but it didn't start out that way. So I started out noticing that there was a gap in reporting for transportation, right? So I was like, I'm going to write a paper on transportation. And that's impossible. It is too broad of a sector. You're never going to get anything out of that. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll narrow it down. I'm going to look at transportation of freight. So then you're looking at maritime freight, you're looking at freight rail, and you're looking at trucks, things that are taking things to other places. And that was all well and good, but the issue was that that is still far too broad of a category to do any sort of targeteering on. So the next thing I did was just focus just solely on rail and dig into rail specifically. And then finally, I got to my end state, which was looking at technology within rail that is a key dependency. And if it were to go down, it would cause significant disruption to rail in the United States. So you can see how you start with a really wide funnel, and then you take it all the way down to something that is actually actionable, and you're able to conduct targeteering against it. So the second thing you want to do is learn, once you figured out who you're targeting, now you're going to figure out why they're a good target. You're learning the fundamentals of your target. So buckle up, everybody. We're going back to school. Sometimes you are starting from the absolute ground floor, and you have to be willing and able to fail. You have to be comfortable not understanding things. If you're somebody who just lives with certainty and you can't handle uncertainty, this is probably going to cause you some significant anxiety. So you have to really be comfortable with the idea of you're not going to know what's going on right away. It's going to take some time. So obviously this is ICS. You have to understand basic processes and control flows. And you have to be able to look at attacks that have been conducted against your target in the past that were both successful and unsuccessful. And the unsuccessful part is important because you need to know what attacks have been propagated against your target that ultimately didn't work because that security safeguard was in place. Or maybe they didn't work because it was just a bad day. Or maybe you need to understand the conditions for which something either did work or didn't work. Both are equally important. So you can do this using a bunch of different resources. Really quick before I get started on this side, OSINT is kind of a misnomer. So I put it on these slides because as a community, we all can kind of register what it is. But really, it's not open source intelligence because intelligence needs to be processed and assessed before it becomes actual intelligence. And my intelligence nerds in the room will be glad that I made that caveat. This is essentially really just open sources, publicly available information that you can use to conduct targeteering. So the first one, ArcGIS. I don't use it a ton. Other people use it and love it. Caveat here, it is paid if you use it a ton, but you can get week-long free trials. So if you go in knowing what you're looking for, it's a great tool. Software mapping, you can put on different layers, add, subtract layers based on what you want to look at. This image actually on the right-hand part of the slide is the Lowe's Hotel in ArcGIS. Probably my favorite tool for this step, actually that's not true, I love hobby blogs, but YouTube is amazing. I am not like a YouTube for fun person, but if you can show me a YouTube video that goes over material at a level that I can understand, and I can pause it and take notes. Like if somebody's talking to you, you can't really pause the person and say like, hold that thought, let me write down what you just said. But you can do that with YouTube, and it's a really amazing tool that can provide you with a serious depth of knowledge across a wide base of topics. I would also say make sure that you look, when you're looking at YouTube videos, make sure that you look at the suggested videos. A lot of this is just about making educated guesses to lead you further down the rabbit hole that you're trying to get down. Hobby blogs, awesome. These are these like websites, you guys I'm sure have seen them, where it's somebody who's super passionate about something, maybe they're retired and this is just what they love, and they maintain these websites, and graphically they look like they're straight out of 2007, but the content is amazing. So you have to note that maybe what you're seeing is not 100% accurate, but a level of detail can be provided in hobby blogs that you wouldn't find anywhere else. This is especially great, I've noticed, with transportation. Air travel, there's obviously a huge fan base for planes, which I didn't know until college. Trains is great for this as well, obviously cars. So hobby blogs, amazing. And then regulations you can use to look at what issues were in place in the past in what you're targeteering that have since been remediated using regulations. So an example of that, if 2 planes hadn't crashed over the Grand Canyon, air traffic control would not look anything like it does today. So really quick example of me using this, when I first started researching the electric grid specifically, I watched so many of these practical engineering videos. I mean, I would say like, yeah, an insane, probably all those 36,000 likes were just me being really excited about these videos. There's a ton of really great resources for the electric sector, every sector on YouTube, but you can get guys who are working out on substations and they've got their phone and they're just like, and this is it, and they're like just walking you around telling you what everything is. Stuff like that, for me personally, super informative. So we're gonna kind of speed things up a little bit here. Key dependencies, once again, a dependency, person, place, or thing. And by nature of risk management, the more dependencies you have, the riskier it is. Key dependency is a single point of failure. So you can start wherever you, with what your output is, and you can trace backwards up from that process to identify what is the point where if it fails, everything falls apart. One thing you can do is, if you're kind of struggling with this, look for ubiquity. If it has high ubiquity, first of all, if you targeteer against it, it's probably going to have wide impact if you're successful. And second of all, if it's really ubiquitous, there's a higher chance that either some installations were faulty, maybe the patches aren't being applied properly. Just from a statistical perspective, there's a higher chance of that happening with the more ubiquitous a device is. And one important thing to note here, you want to select your key focus, but you don't want to only select a key focus. So in Dale's talk this morning, he talked about how when you're exploring, sometimes you come up with essentially a nothing burger, right? You come up with a dead end. If you only focused on one thing while you were building this process, and you hit a dead end, you're dead in the water, like you're stuck. So as you go through and you learn the fundamentals, kind of keeping a list of, okay, I think this might be valuable, I think this might be valuable, I think this might be valuable, having the thing you care about the most on top, and then filtering down from there to just have some backup options. It's more important than you would think. Some resources here, manuals online, awesome. There's surprisingly a lot of them. Buyer beware, do not download manuals from sketchy sites. This is a threat vector that attackers have used to get onto engineering workstations. So I have to say that because I've seen it happen. On this one, LinkedIn's my favorite. LinkedIn is awesome. If you can find people who work either with or for who you're targeteering against, it's basically like a free encyclopedia on that person's life. And so you can see if they have listed that they're really proficient in such and such a skill or such and such a technology, you're making the inference that they probably work with that in their day-to-day life. It's information that you would just never have if LinkedIn didn't exist, without like finding that person at a bar and being like, tell me what you work on, which we're not doing because we're cool and we're targeteers, so we're probably in a basement. Public government databases are great. I don't use a ton of them, but I know a lot of people who do. EIA.gov is a good one if you're in the energy sector. Vendor press releases are a huge wealth of information. So vendors love to brag about what they're doing. So you can look up stuff all the time that says like, vendor X is so excited to excited to partner with company Y so that we can do A, B, and C. And you're like, great, thank you for that. I'm really glad you had that bragging moment because now I've got some information. Another thing to note with this though, this is vendors of all shapes and sizes, right? So even I have seen it happen where there's a company that does like HVAC installations, for example, and they will take a picture of this amazing HVAC installation they did in your facility, put it on their website and say, look at how amazing our HVAC installation is. And you're like, that is a picture of my data center on the internet. So be aware of that with your own vendors as well. This was a project I did that I really loved. On the left side is all the pipelines in the North Sea. Thank you, the BBC, for making it a nice picture for us. On the right side, you kind of have to zoom in, and I should have done that myself, but I didn't. You can see that there's only, if you look at the North Sea area, there's only 2 full blue dots, and those are operational terminals for liquefied natural gas. So when natural gas comes in off the ocean, it needs to go through regasification, which is turning it from a liquid back into a gas. That has to happen at a regasification plant. There are not that many of them, and so that is a huge choke point where if the regasification plant went off, you wouldn't be able to continue the process. So this is where I'm the weakest, understanding how the key dependencies fit within the environment. So it's 2 sides of the same coin, right? You have connectivity, which is how it's connected, who does it talk to, how does it talk, and then there's segmentation, which is what is it not talking to? Is that deliberate? Is it lucky? And that connectivity can help you not only when you're actually doing the initial targeteering operation, but it can help you pivot later down the line if there's something that you think you might want to look at that it's connected to. It can help you identify secondary or tertiary targets. So if you're lucky and you can find schematics online, obviously best day ever. Tell me where you found them. I love using a combination of pictures and Google Maps to establish connectivity and segmentation if you're looking at a place. So you can get a picture on Google Maps, so they're like public, whatever, and then you can a picture on Google Images, and you pull up Google Maps, and you're looking down at the facility, and you're looking at the picture, and you're looking at the facility, and you're looking at the picture, and you can start to see how things intersect and connect. I have not done it, I've heard that if you know what to look for, you can track transmission lines across the US and other countries. I've also heard if you know what to look for, you can track natural gas pipelines as well. So a lot that you can find just on Google Maps if you know what to look for. Regulations are super helpful for where things have been a problem in the past. So like this is just the NERC page. And information sharing groups are great. So sometimes they don't vet their members. If you have a group, please vet your members. But sometimes you can just join a group. This is also great for like Twitter groups, for example. You can organize people. Slack channels, like a lot of this, and I wanted to make this point up front, this is not a technical talk. Like if you want a technical talk, stage 2's got some great ones. This is just high level conceptual, how can you do this? So, you don't need a bunch of technical experience to join an information sharing group. Like you just need a nice smile and a polite message in some cases. So I don't have a really great picture for this one, but what the story I wanted to tell is essentially how you can use one of these reference architectures as kind of a baseline in your own mind. And when you're going through the process of targeteering, and once again, you've got your really nice OneNote that you're maintaining, you can kind of start to build one of these pictures for yourself of what you're working on. And you can use that to later reference back to in your reporting or whatever. So the 5th and final formal step is looking for vulnerabilities. I call this step phone a friend because I think working as an analyst, working with researchers in a direct capacity is a really valuable thing that you can do. There are ways, of course, that you can find vulnerabilities. Looking stuff up on NVD, different vulnerability databases, super helpful. You can also look for systems that either aren't updated or they're just straight up not supported by the vendor anymore. Obviously, we all work in OT. We know there's a lot of legacy systems and legacy equipment in place. Identifying that can be super, super valuable. And then one of my favorites is just appreciating the features that could be a vulnerability if you hit it at the right angle. So this is the good old-fashioned we sell product cue because it's got this great feature, and I'm taking a look and I'm like, that feature is directly communicating with the internet. So maybe don't buy that and put it in your facility. These are really great because generally the feature that is vulnerable is something that that the product was specifically designed for. So it is automatically off the gate something that people don't want to turn off when they're protecting their systems. So obviously, all of the different databases you can use, I think it's super important to leverage structured analytical techniques. These help you check your bias as you're working through this process. Make sure you're not, it helps you identify any assumptions you might be making as you're working through this. Analysts in the room will know that identifying your assumptions is one of the most important things you can do and you must do when you're conducting analysis. You can also, obviously, like I said, look for known features, look for things that a product was advertised as being unique for including, and then looking back on historical events. I can't say it enough, the past teaches us so much about what is possible. So, of course, we're in Florida. I've talked about it once, got to talk about it again, Oldsmar. Oldsmar happened because they were running legacy Windows 7 that was no longer supported, and TeamViewer, which we all know has like significant issues. This was not sophisticated. That's like two things that we already knew about. So that's just an example of using known vulnerabilities in conjunction with unpatched or outdated software, leading to an attack. Moderately successful attack, depending on your definition. Also, if there's any Oldsmar people in the room, I am so sorry. So the number one question that I get asked when I'm going through this and explaining this to people is, how do you know when to stop? And my answer is, you just know. But it turns out that that is not helpful if you don't live in my brain. So I started asking other people who I know also conduct this how they know it's time to stop. And my favorite quote that I got is, you stop once the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. So that's when throughout this process, you have to be both engaged and one step behind, right? So you have to be actively looking at the process, but you also have to be constantly reflecting on if what you're doing is moving your objective forward. Obviously, objectives can change with time, but analysts, I can find myself going off on a tangent that is absolutely and fully unrelated to what I'm doing. And so that constantly bringing yourself back and asking yourself, either is this adding to what I'm trying to do or will this move me one step forward is key. And you might not, a lot of times, you're making an educated guess and hoping that what you learn later corroborates what you are saying today. That's just part of analysis. So then there's the mystery sixth step, which is profit. You've targeteered, you found something vulnerable, you've built up a use case for why it is the way it is. This is the next step. So once you've conducted this, you can set your red team against it. Like, you've come up with this hypothesis that if this was successfully targeted, would it take something down? That's putting the people who have the hands on the keyboards there to actually go take a look and see if you were right. Bulking up defenses, huge. So looking at your connectivity, looking at your segmentation, figuring out, could I put another firewall in here? Could I maybe disrupt this connectivity in a way because it doesn't really need to be there? And then, of course, you can also look at creating redundancies for your key dependencies. Obviously, a single point of failure is not the single point of failure if it is literally not the single point. So having those redundancies wherever you can, so that if there was a successful operation against or disruption of your technology or your process is super, super important. So I am knocking on your door, targeteering on your stuff. What can you do to stop me? Do this process and do it often. The more you do it, the more you're going to find that's weak within your system. I think consulting with engineers is one of the most underutilized elements of cybersecurity for ICS and OT. Those are the people who know what's going on with your equipment better than anyone. And they can determine they can give you suggestions of like, hey man, I saw this thing the other day, like maybe you should go check it out. But they can also tell you, if you come and say like, hey, I think I found this thing that's vulnerable, what do I do? They can tell you, actually, no, don't worry about it, that's fine. Or they can tell you, oh yeah, you're right, that's a huge issue, let's go figure out how to fix that. You can't control what other people say in most cases, but you control your own narrative. Please do not put pictures on your website that will help me. Really think about the pictures that you're putting on your website before you put them on your website, before you make press releases, before you make social media postings. Just think about it. And also remember that ultimately security is everyone's job. So way back when I used to work for a bank, there was a story of an intern who was on his first day of his internship, and he took a picture of himself, like, oh, first day of my internship, and on the computer screen behind him, and I don't know how he got this information, was a list of the bank's most valuable assets. He does not work for that bank, obviously, anymore. So that's somebody who's not a security person and who might not even have that much interaction with the technology themselves, but they're creating a significant security risk. So let's wrap it up. What does targeteering allow you to do? It helps you identify vulnerable OT and within your system. It helps you define and defend key dependencies, super important. And it helps you mature your security posture against adversaries of varying capabilities. But most importantly, it allows you to take a proactive approach towards protecting your community. And that's what I've got.